are back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. As we continue the agonizing descent into the election campaign season, we're hearing more and more about prosecutors, about criminal justice, mostly from the Republican side, and mostly, let us say, not entirely supportive of the values that you, the audience, or I might hold on these subjects. And we heard some more of that kind of rhetoric from the Republicans this week, both during their presidential debate and outside it. It is, of course, a common theme on the right. And we, of course, have seen the politicization of the office of prosecutor in this country. We've covered it before. Here to discuss that subject with us now is Jessica Brand. She's a criminal justice expert. She is founder of a group called the WREN Collective. That is WREN, WREN Collective. Before that, she was the legal director of the Justice Collaborative, and before that, she worked in the Texas Defender's Service. So she's got a lot of experience in this. She's also written about it for multiple publications, and I thought it would be great to get her perspective on this. So first of all, Jessica Brand, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for talking about this.
Oh, it's so important. We really believe in that here. And so also thanks for your great work in this. And I'll start with this. Have you had a chance to look at or review any of the exchanges either from the debate or other recent political comments about criminal justice in this campaign?
I have far more than I ever wanted to.
So tell us, to me, I mean, I'll start out, okay? For me, having lived a ridiculously long time, it seems to me this has been the go-to area for the right in various ways for many decades. Fear-mongering, racism, the media collaborates with this, in my view. We've covered the studies showing how the media disproportionately covers crimes committed by people of color. We've talked about newspapers that have darkened the images of criminal suspects. We talked with Chesa Boudin and others about the more recent development of politicizing the district attorney office and the campaigns for that office. And now we're seeing it once again. So I guess part of my reaction, there's so much to discuss about, but maybe one place where I'd like to start is, how do they still get away with this? This is the most, it's not like their approaches or their rhetoric or their aggression on this topic has had any appreciable impact on actual crime or public safety. We're a very highly incarcerated society. Seems to me, any sort of analytical approach to this problem would say that way isn't working in any way, except I guess politically, maybe for them. So why do they keep going at it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The hallmark of the Republican Party has been to harness people's fear, to harness victimization, and to use that for political gain without ever providing a meaningful solution for crime, for fear, for people's safety, for public health. And in fact, a lot of their policies actually cause it. But I think, and specifically, right, they're sort of harnessing crime that happens against communities of color, and then they feel like they don't have to actually solve for those problems because what they're really trying to do is instill fear in their base, which are largely white people. And so they can sort of get away with doing nothing because they know, there's a target audience for it. I think the reason they get away with it is because the Democratic Party has been so feckless in actually providing an alternative version for what public safety, for what healthy communities would look like. And I, hate to lay the blame at them, but we have not been very good at that until maybe recently. So, when someone says progressive prosecutor is making, Philadelphia dangerous, one response to that might be, Like, that's ridiculous. What's actually making Philadelphia dangerous is that you've divested from the school system for so long. You have let Kensington not have people come to pick up the trash, right? You have not fixed a light there in decades. You have historically underfunded these communities. And what do you think is going to happen when you totally neglect and ignore people? And here is what an actual solution would look like that. We're going to put in social workers that are hospitals. We're going to green communities, which can reduce violence by 30%. Those are actual solutions that could happen tomorrow, right? You don't have to actually solve the whole problem with schools or jobs right away to keep communities safe. But we have not been very good at saying, yes, people are afraid. And yes, there is crime. And yes, we have a real solution for it. And it's not what they say. And we sort of failed on that. And so it's like been easy for Republicans to run away with that narrative and to keep coming back to the same well. That's just my hypothesis for why it keeps working. Could be wrong.
Well, of course, any hypothesis could be wrong, but it certainly sounds right. And it certainly seems that, of course, we could also extend that conversation to Philadelphia or any other large city. Would be safer if there weren't so much poverty, if there weren't so much insecurity, if there was more job opportunity. But let's talk about the Democrats a little bit here. They're almost diffident, or I would say they are timid about saying, first of all, tough on crime, quote unquote, may be an emotionally satisfying posture for some people to hear. But if you really want to improve your personal sense of safety, it doesn't work, number one. Number two, if a neighbor is threatening you, and people who commit crimes are our neighbors to a large extent. If a neighbor is threatening you, do you want to talk to them and work it out? Do you want to, if they need psychiatric help, do you want them to get psychiatric help? Or do you just want to endlessly provoke them until they attack you and then you can shoot them? I mean, which is the wiser course? Forget them, forget compassion, forget your mirror neurons, all of this stuff. What's the wiser course for you? Wouldn't it be one-on-one to deal with the human issues before it escalates? And yet when you try it, I would say the Democrats seem utterly incapable as a body, there are some exceptions, of translating that to an election conversation. They'd rather say, well, but I'm tough on crime too. Does that analysis resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, I think some of it is like punishment is in our DNA. Like it's like throwing a baseball for a pitcher, right? Like it's in everybody's muscle memory. And so it's so hard to envision talking about something that's been so ingrained in us for so long. And look, I was a public defender for a long time. And, I really think that our carceral system just is deeply devastating in a way that does not improve public safety. And yet, I found myself walking through situations where I think like, well, what is that? What is the alternative here? What's going to be the other solution? So, I can see how for most people, that's kind of immediately where we revert. But that doesn't mean it keeps people safe. And so you have to start really ingraining in the same way we ingrain punishment, like supportive housing, mental health treatment, substance use treatment, greening communities. Like we need messengers and that works, right? I mean, we talk about our criminal justice system. It's like if you started on a blank canvas, you would never make it look the way it looks, right? I mean, what we're doing is basically like someone who has failed treatment for cancer and sticking with the failed treatment for cancer. That's what we're doing with our solutions to punishment. But it sounds easy, so we don't do anything else. We need people to start talking about the things that actually work, right? It's not like we don't have solutions to these problems, but it feels, I think, so daunting for people to talk about that when you have to undo kind of how we viscerally react to these solutions that people haven't really wanted to take that stand. Now, when they do, they get elected, right? It's actually very popular with their communities, with their voters. People want alternative solution. Polling shows that when you say to someone, like, do you want prison or do you want more treatment beds for the fentanyl problem that you're seeing in your backyard? They actually say like, oh yeah, it's not prison that we want, we want the treatment bed. So it's a popular thing for politicians, for policymakers to say. They just need a little bravery to do it.
And it's, yes, I agree. And it seems to me there's almost a kind of Pavlovian, reflex against starting to look like you might be, quote unquote, soft on crime when you're not being, quote unquote, soft on crime at all. You're just exploring ways that work and that are, yes, compassionate and fair, but also are going to make all of us safer. I guess I'm also thinking about how this plays out. The criminal justice writer Chloe Cockburn, who I know you know, Coburn rather, excuse me, is wrote this morning, as a matter of fact, I didn't know this statistic, roughly 40 million Americans now live in a jurisdiction overseen by a DA who ran on a reform platform. That to me is interesting because, first of all, it shows a hunger for a different approach, seems to me. But secondly, we've seen enormous, or it seems to me, we've seen enormous resources arrayed against people who have run for district attorney on a reform platform. So the idea that so many could win suggests that there's a groundswell that's enabled some of them, not all of them, but some of them, to fight the resistance they're facing. Is that a fair analysis in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes to, the Republicans are harnessing pain, and some Democrats of certain communities for their political base, but that is actually not the group that is actually experiencing the crime. So Larry Krasner, not only the first time, he won overwhelmingly the second time, and crime was high, but voters thought the old solution wasn't going to work. We like what he's selling, right? He's talking about it and giving money to violence prevention groups. Like there's other solutions out there, and he won again. And people are winning. I mean, I think what's so telling about the strength of what people want is the re-elections, and most people, not all, but most people are winning a second time after they've kept their promises and they've implemented this new vision for what justice and safety can look like, and then their communities still win again. And so, the idea that reform and a new vision of healthy communities is failing is ridiculous to me, because more and more people are running on it and getting elected on it. I don't know if that answers your point, sort of meandering.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I think the public narrative doesn't help in this. First, I guess I'm thinking of two narratives. I'm thinking of the entertainment narrative as well as the news media narrative. I have to be honest. I have I have these weaknesses for like Korean cop shows and, Bollywood, movies or whatever in my off time. And, but whether it's American made, European made, wherever it's made, this emotionally satisfying, if simple-minded narrative of, the one person with a gun standing up against injustice, I think on one level that meta narrative gets burned into everybody's brain, and it's hard to say, we don't have any hero shows where there's a psychologist and a social worker. We should, but psychologist and a social worker and a housing advocate fighting to, or maybe I'll pitch that, it's not a bad idea, but that's not how we're programmed by entertainment. And then in the news media, we hear about the recalls of progressive DAs. We hear about, the phrase defund the police gets constantly echoed, and then Democrats feel obligated to renounce it, but Republicans continue to repeat it. And each denunciation, someone like George Lakoff, the communications expert, will tell you, just reinforces it, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't hear anybody saying, look, what you just said, which I think is so important, which is there is a movement at the local level of people pragmatically and aggressively and compassionately tackling these problems. So that's my long-winded way of saying it sounds like you feel a certain sense of optimism despite the political headwinds.
I feel totally optimistic. I mean, yeah, there's setbacks in every movement. I mean, I think if any, when we started winning these elections, when, grassroots groups started to really organize around these issues, if you thought like, okay, in 10 years, we're going to end mass incarceration and put in public health solutions, like, I would say, well, you were delusional. I mean, this is we have spent the last 40 years telling people the only thing we can do is keep people behind bars. Well, also, by the way, Congress precluding the CDC from giving any money into gun violence prevention research. So that's like 70 years of stagnation or regression, however you want to call it, that has to be undone. So yeah, Chesa got recalled in San Francisco, in a place that has a lot of very, very wealthy people who, frankly, wanted to put homeless people in jail, in prison, and couldn't see another way to actually make their communities look safe and get people off the streets, even though there are lots of other ways to do that, right? And so, yes, like that was heartbreaking. And, Chesa had this incredible vision, and there was also a really bad confluence where, COVID happened and crime spiked. I mean, it was just, would Chesa have been recalled if he were elected in 2022? I'm not so sure, if different. So there are setbacks. Of course there are setbacks. Like, of course we're going to lose some time. This is a really hard issue that we're tackling, but the momentum remains forward. And I think the success of that movement can be seen by how anti-democratic the attacks are right now on progressivism. Ron DeSantis, just removed his second state's attorney from office for basically no reason. Like, that is wild authoritarianism, and Monique Burrell, before that, Andrew Warren. He does that because what they're doing is working, right? Because he needs to tamp down on an electorate that is excited, that is motivated to turn out, that has a vision that is different than that. They act because they're scared, right? It's not because of public safety, because if Ron DeSantis cared about public safety, he would have invested in the juvenile system. He would have invested in gun control. He would have provided more money into healthcare. Same thing in Texas, right? The Texas legislature passed a bill that's going to take effect sometime after Labor Day that allows people to file for removal of prosecutors. And it was clearly targeted at prosecutors in Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Fort Bend County. So the progressive prosecutors, right? This isn't about public safety. It's about tamping down on cities that are turning blue and that are turning out because they're excited about this new vision of justice, right? If Texas cared about helping people, right, you would be able to have safe injection sites, right? You would be able to help people with, harm reduction in fentanyl cases. And instead, like, they've precluded anybody from doing any of that. I mean, forget gun control. The limits they have on, just helping people with addiction here are wild. They're the opposite of what science says should work. So, these things are scary for the movement because we're in kind of, I think, uncharted territory where democracy is really at stake, right? Where people feel like they're going to lose the right to vote. But the reason that's happening is because it's successful, right? And when it's successful, authoritarians feel like they have to exercise as much authority as they can over people's life. So, that's not to say it's not going to be a tough and terrible fight over, the next 4 years, and especially going into the next election cycle. But we're only there because it's been very successful.
Well, I love that take. I have to say, I find that heartening myself. There are a couple other, besides authoritarians like Ron DeSantis or Abbott in Texas, there are a couple other big forces that, are mobilizing, I guess, because they're, as you say, because they're afraid, they're threatened, and understandably, rightfully so. One is that's of interest to me and concerns me is the police unions and the police themselves. I'm normally very pro-union is my default position, but coming from New York, the New York City Police Association can be very frightening. I know Chesa Boudin, who I think is a wonderful person, could have done a wonderful job given the opportunity. I think the police really slowed down on their arrests to undermine his record, and then he was attacked based on the declining number of arrests, which wasn't in his control, it was in the police's control. So one of the forces that I'm deeply concerned about is the police themselves. And then you hear these reports about, and I'm not, the lefty in me says, look, police officers are fellow members of the working class, right? But you hear also about the politicization of the police, the infiltration of right-wing and white nationalist groups. You hear about, and we've certainly seen over the past 20, 30 years, the militarization of them. So they seem to be transforming from a civilian policing force to something like a paramilitary force with, everything takes us, my friend Max Blumenthal, the journalist, when they arrested him on a trumped up charge, they kicked down his door and had the smoke grenades. They're doing that for everything now. You know what I'm talking about. So I guess force number one that I worry about is the political force of the police. And where do you think that fits in all of this?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. The first thing I want to say is I want to distinguish between the force of the police union and the force of the police department, because I think one thing that is deeply troubling about police unions is that they are not actually representative of the current makeup of the police force. So if you look at Philadelphia, the police force, and I'm not, here to praise or not praise any particular police department, but it's become much more diverse, the Philadelphia Police Department. But the police union is full of lots of retired police department members, right? And so a very skewed membership vote and membership demands than what you might have, and what the needs might be of your local police department. And police unions, and I too, like most blue voters, I too am a big supporter of teachers unions and most labor unions. The police unions are different, right? When you think about unions, you think about protecting people from power, right? That's why we need workers' unions, is because we need joint and collective work is important against power. Police are the power, right? They have the power. They carry weapons. They can arrest you. They can put you in jail. They can put on their police sirens and pull you over for a tinted window. So it's really, in my mind, and lots of different people could have much smarter and more nuanced analyses, but you have me at your show. In my mind, it's different because, and I'm not saying people don't need worker protections, but the power dynamic is quite different than when you talk about your ordinary, for example, picket line. So I'll just say that. But yes, I mean, the police departments, the police unions, they have like 20 and 30 comms people on staff sometimes in the big ones who can just put out the police spotter. They can put out their narrative. They can say, we came to this one in this one case, it broke bad, but they have a full staff of people who can infiltrate the news. And, if you're a breaking news reporter who has to cover 40 things a day for local news on television, you're going to take that press release and that's going to be your story. I mean, for reasons that should be obvious. So their ability to control people's perception of safety is, I think, deeply, deeply disturbing. And then, of course, police unions' ability to protect bad apples who the local police department fires, right? Like local police departments fire people all the time for bad behavior, and then the police union gets them their jobs back, even if they've shot someone back, which happens all the time. Obviously that is a sort of a whole different conversation. But I would say, yes, both their ability to control narrative, to control arrests, and to therefore impact how people feel about safety is hugely, hugely troubling, but more so, I would say, with the union shops than anything else.
Another aspect of the police, it seems to me, Jessica, is I got curious at one point. I think it was during the height of Black Lives Matter, when people were talking about the risks of being a police officer, and certainly there are risks. I don't discount that. But I looked up the mortality and injury statistics by profession. They're not at the top. I mean, there are people who are much more endangered at work than police officers, including firefighters, people who work in the lumber industry, commercial fishermen and women. So it seems to me that, and I bring that up partially because I've also read and heard about different types of training that have been conducted that basically indoctrinate the police into seeing the civilian population they're there to serve and protect, according to the doors of their cars, to see those populations as potential insurgents and threats to their lives, and hence, even if someone maybe doesn't go into police work intending to harm innocents, I'm afraid that they're drilled with such a sense of paranoia and fear that any kid with a toy might be a short adult with a gun who's about to shoot you, that tragedies happen because in part of this training that says look out for every situation because there's risk in it, for a potential risk for you in it. Am I accurate in that perception, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start by saying, I'm not a police officer. I've never had to put myself in those positions. I'm sure as, much training as I could have, if I had to go to someone's door and who I thought I had to make an arrest of, it would feel scary. I mean, I don't think you can ever get that out of someone. And so, I want to have some respect for that aspect of that job.
Sure.
As do you. That being said, there's a lot of research out there. Like Phil Goff at the Center for Policing Equity, who's now at Yale University, has done a ton of amazing research about sort of what he calls masculinity in policing, right? And it is this idea that everybody's dangerous and we're here to, kind of be the aggressor and say that. And that mentality, you can see how you've seen it on videos, right? How that plays out. And it's, it's horrific. And it's, so that's, I think, definitely true. And it's, when politicians and reporters get up and they portray people as super predators, right? People who have to make those arrests, they read about that and it's, it becomes part of their subconsciousness. So absolutely. I mean, that's a huge problem. I think, I don't know how you change that. That's such a big cultural problem to change. Again, Dr. Goff has, some solutions like hire more women, I think is, one of them. But another one is you could just stop some of these arrests, right? So, just don't make pretext stops for cars. If you see a vehicle with a tinted window, you want to send them a ticket. If that's worth your time, send them a ticket, right? If someone forgets to put on a turn signal, if you want to send them a ticket, if that's worth your time, send them a ticket, but don't make the stops, right? Which is where we see some of what you've described really play out. Because, if we're going to wait for people's unconscious bias to be changed, we're going to be having the same conversations of, 100 years from now if, climate change hasn't taken over the world. So it's, you just have to make some big policy changes to stop some of that from happening, I think, right now, because I don't think you're going to change hearts and minds that fast when, again, it's in everybody's DNA.
So what are there was one other counterforce I wanted to mention here, and that's wealthy people. I mean, not as a whole, right? Not every billionaire or whatever, but a lot of money was in quote unquote liberal San Francisco, which is now tech, billionaire San Francisco. A lot of money was invested in recalling Chesa Boudin. They've also invested money in other attempts to unseat or defeat progressive DAs and progressive DA candidates. Some of that is just because those particular wealthy people are Republicans. But what, if any, central role do you think that big money has in the struggle and what people are up against and trying to change?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, campaigns are expensive, and we don't like it. It's gross, but it's Citizens United came, and it's here, and there's unlimited spending in a lot of these state races, and so big money is always going to play, I think, unfortunately, a part. Sometimes for good, and sometimes for bad. Or good and bad is probably not the right phrase for it, but you follow what I'm saying. Sometimes for reform and sometimes not for reform. I think it varies a lot across the country. I think, my hope is that the San Francisco money is a little sui generis. My sort of big, unsupported, untested hypothesis about San Francisco is a lot of it was about the unhoused population and sort of the explosion of drugs there, and people who are wealthy being angry that there was not a solution and putting a lot of money into trying to blame someone. Or maybe they didn't like Chesa. I don't know. I don't live there.
Or maybe they're perceptive enough to realize that what part of the real solution, because San Francisco has a dreadful housing shortage problem, maybe they're aware that the real solution would involve taxing them at a level that they wouldn't like, and it was more cost efficient to just target the progressive DA. Who knows, right? But I guess in conclusion, Jessica, maybe I'll ask you what people should be watching and following, tracking in the next few months when it comes to this issue, and if there's something they can do, if there are programs they can support or whatever, that's great too. But where do you see, I hate always using military language, but where do you see the kind of battlefronts in the next few months in this struggle?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an election year, or 2024 is an election year, so there's going to be a lot of conversation about crime because it's an election year. And so it'll be interesting because unlike the midterms, actually, crime is falling in a lot of places. So if you're a voter, right, I would ask yourself a few things, like who is actually providing a solution to the problem? Because just because someone identifies a problem, is it really a problem, as big of a problem?
Right.
Crime is, I want to stop and say, crime is always a problem. There's a researcher and doctor named Dr. John Rich who writes this amazing book. And one thing he says is, crime has always been a problem in certain communities. It's just that, there are times like elections where we like to play politics about it. But there are lots of people who live with this on a day-to-day basis, and it's horrible. And we should always care about crime. We should always care about crime. So the question is, who is coming before you with an actual solution to the problem and we know that prison is not a very good solution because we've had lots of it and there's still crime for people. So if you're a voter, who's actually offering you something that might actually help the people who are actually impacted by these problems every day? The where of it, 2024 is a big year in the DA sort of map. LA is up. Houston, Harris County, there's a huge fight that's going to happen there. And, that has been a place where I think people thought they were electing someone who was progressive, and it did not turn out that way. So that's a really interesting place. Austin, Texas, another big year. There's Florida, the woman that Monique Laurel, who Ron DeSantis just removed, she's actually running for re-election right now. There's a lot of Florida races that are up. There's some Georgia races that are up. I mean, it's just, I think Detroit is up. So there's just, and some of those will have progressive people running, some of them won't. Some of them will have progressives running, uncontested races. St. Louis City, another place. I mean, it's just the map for that is enormous. So if you're interested in getting involved, I mean, I would look at all of those places and all of those campaigns and see, who really, really excites you. If you're a person like you with access to a microphone and a platform and reporters, I would really try to remind and educate people about what solves crime. I mean, the media is still our best translator and our biggest translator for how people understand what is happening in their communities and what can solve those problems in their communities. And so, if you are someone who does reporting, really talking about solutions journalism, talking about what actually works, reminding people that there are alternatives that can build healthy and safe communities, I think over the next it's more than 12 months, whatever, up until November 2024 that's so depressing. It's going to be so important. And so, if you're a reporter who's listening to this, really thinking about educating people about solutions, you have so much power, and you can really influence how people perceive their communities and how people, turn out and what they vote for.
Good answer. I like that answer. So Jessica Brand, founder of the Wren Collective, we're going to be hearing a lot about criminal justice, as you say, in the next 12 months. I hope you'll come back and join us again to discuss it at some point. But thanks so much for all your great work in this area, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
You too. We'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.